Hello, everyone. I'm Brad Douville. I'm President and CEO of Greenlane Renewables, and I'd like to step you through our company. I'm going to be making a few forward-looking statements today, so caution. Firstly, starting with our tagline. So we are changing the nature of natural gas. What does that mean? We're really following the trend of decarbonization. So that's a clear trend that's happening now. Think of renewable natural gas as to the natural gas grid as wind and solar are to the electricity grid, but it's much earlier in its journey. And RNG is particularly relevant for two of the largest and most difficult to decarbonize sectors of the global economy: transportation, think commercial transportation, and the natural gas grid. We're seeing renewable natural gas rapidly shift from a niche to a mainstream drop-in substitute for natural gas. It's fully blendable at any ratio. So what do we do as Greenlane? So as Greenlane, we are a market-leading global technology provider of biogas upgrading systems. The systems that we provide produce clean, low carbon or carbon negative renewable natural gas from various organic waste sources. It could be a landfill, a wastewater treatment plant, farms such as dairy or hog farms, and food waste streams. We clean up the gas and we make it suitable for either injection directly into the natural gas grid or direct use as a vehicle fuel. So some key highlights. We are a pure player. So all we do is focus on the renewable natural gas space. We have supplied the largest global supply capacity globally in the world, over 110 systems in 18 countries. Our current backlog as at September 30th, the last quarterly results that we reported, are just over 43 million. That's a 350% year-over-year backlog growth. Our sales pipeline, which is the opportunities visibility that we have that could translate into contracts over the next 2 years, that's sitting at just under 700 million. So it's a healthy gross margin based business. We're fast approaching profitability. I'll get into the financials in a moment. And we're also expanding our core business, which is the supply of equipment and supply of systems. We're expanding into a recurring revenue and profit stream through build, own, operate. We have a strong IP portfolio comprised of patents and trade secrets on a number of different technologies. That is something that's unique about Greenlane. We are the only one in the space that offers multiple technologies to do this upgrading process. I'll explain that. And we're looking at a global opportunity of, it's estimated at 90 billion of biogas upgrading system sales. The significant drivers are demands from governments, utilities, corporations, consumers, everyone looking to decarbonize. So the two key markets, we've got the gas grid and we've got commercial transportation. An ecosystem for renewable natural gas looks like this. We have on the right-hand side of this slide, we have the end uses. So this is the gas grid, which I talked about, transportation space. Again, think commercial vehicles. This is displacing diesel fuel. It's not so easy to clean up that space, to get rid of diesel fuel. The number one alternative to diesel today is natural gas, but more and more it's becoming renewable natural gas. Remember that renewable natural gas is a fully drop-in substitute for natural gas. It's chemically identical. There's no changes to the vehicle or engine in this case. When it goes into a pipeline, the other key market where RNG is relevant is the appliances that use it. Again, no change. It's fully mixable with natural gas. If you look at the left-hand side of this slide, those are the feedstock sources that I've talked about. Landfills, wastewater treatment plants, of course, those are ubiquitous. Those are everywhere. They produce biogas today. That biogas, you have to do something with it. It's a waste product, but you have this opportunity to upgrade it, upcycle it into high-value renewable natural gas. Other waste streams, such as food waste, which more and more is getting legislated to be diverted from landfills, is becoming a focus for a waste stream that has to be dealt with, and you can put that into a digester. And we're seeing more and more agricultural projects at dairy farms and hog farms to capture the manure. Again, it has to be dealt with, and it's a wonderful feedstock for creating this high-value renewable natural gas. So it's really not a question of when, of if. It's really just now how quickly will the world decarbonize. This trend has really taken shape. Much of it came out of the Paris Accord in 2014. And we're building on that success globally in terms of people recognizing the need and taking action. One thing that's really important to understand is think of end markets like residential, commercial, and industrial. There's only two ways to provide energy to those two key markets. One is through the electricity grid, the other is through the natural gas grid. The electricity grid, of course, has been greened for quite some time, starting with hydro, geothermal, wind and solar in the last 10 to 15 years. But the gas grid's bigger. It delivers more energy to those end uses than the electricity grid. Not everyone really appreciates that. And also it's much earlier in driving a decarbonization of that system. So that's why RNG is so attractive to gas utilities, is because it's really it's the key thing that allows them to decarbonize. And then I've already talked about transportation and the challenges with displacing diesel fuel. So we've seen gas utilities and governments put targets in place. There's various targets around the world, somewhere between 10 to 20% in certain jurisdictions. 10 to 20% RNG in the gas distribution network is what that represents. And the pricing mechanism for renewable natural gas is attractive. In certain transportation projects in the United States, for example, you can fetch up to $100 US per MMBTU, and that's compared to Henry Hub pricing of $250 per MMBTU. That's all a consequence of laws in place that drive the distributors of diesel and gasoline in the US and in certain states like California and Oregon to have growing amounts of renewable content, and renewable natural gas is the most attractive, and that's why it's valued so highly. In terms of the global opportunity, there's a couple key reports that come out every fall, the BP Energy Outlook, the IEA, the International Energy Agency's World Energy Outlook. Up until recently, RNG wasn't even in these reports. So again, we're earlier in that journey relative to wind and solar. But in the most recent report in 2020, there were projections for what does the RNG possibility look like, at least over the next few decades. So the IEA over the next 20 years says that it can reach around 9,000 petajoules. BP is saying it probably reaches around that same 9,000. Maybe it takes a bit longer in the BP analysis. But in both cases, 9,000 petajoules equates to a cumulative 90 billion in biogas upgrading equipment sales. So that's really what we're talking about, is our kind of market opportunity over the coming decades. Key industry developments, there's a number of them. I've already talked about some of the gas utilities in terms of them setting displacement targets of having natural gas displace 15 or 20% of the natural gas in the network. SoCalGas is the largest of the gas utilities in North America, and they've said 5% RNG by 2022, just around the corner, and 20% by 2030. These are large volumes and they're aggressive targets. In the transportation space, a good example is UPS. They've long been committed to natural gas, but recently they bought another 6,000 natural gas powered trucks. But in fact, at the same time, they made a commitment to RNG. So they're really renewable natural gas powered trucks. We saw Anheuser-Busch last August. They purchased 180 trucks to deliver beverage products reliant on renewable natural gas. And then we have the corporate actions. Microsoft has been a real leader in this of late. They've talked about by 2030 becoming carbon negative, by 2050 actually reversing all the emissions that they've produced since founding in the 70s. We've heard it from Larry Fink talking about capital flows into this space. I think we've seen that. Amazon, Jeff Bezos put his 10 billion Earth Fund together to combat climate change. So a lot of activity in the space. In 2020, we saw another trend. We saw a trend of the oil and gas supermajors moving into this space. I talked about the gas utilities. 2019 was a lot of activity in the gas utilities that really began then. 2020 seemed to be all about the oil and gas supermajors moving into the RNG space. We had, in the spring of last year, we had Shell, BP, and Total all announce their net zero emissions by 2050 ambitions. You might expect maybe not too much is going to happen after these broad statements, but we actually saw action. We saw activity take place. in the RNG space. Shell, they announced a large, or what is characterized as the largest RNG offtake contract in Europe. We saw BP do a deep dive with their investors in September. They talked all about their joint venture that is developing projects. They talked about their Central California dairy project in particular. Total in September, they announced a new global business unit focused on biogas and RNG production globally. Chevron, while they didn't announce a 2050 ambition, they have been active. They did a deal in the summer to provide RNG to the largest ports in the US and Southern California. And then in October, they announced a joint venture with Brightmark, a developer of RNG projects at dairy farms. This joint venture will invest in those projects across the United States. The day after they announced that JV, we announced an order with them. So let me describe our technologies. As I mentioned off the top, we are the only company in the space to offer multiple biogas upgrading technologies. We do that because there's not really one single right answer. Every project's different, and all these technologies have a slightly different sweet spot in terms of where they play. When we sell a unit, this is a bit oversimplified, what's shown on the screen. There's more complexity, more of a total system. What you're looking at is the core of the system, the core technology that does this separation process, separating the carbon dioxide from the biomethane to create that high purity RNG that's mixable in the pipeline. When we sell a product, it's usually between 2 and 8 million. That's on a single size, and then we'll have multiples. So for example, last June, we announced a large order. It was 21 million contract size. That was because it was a multiple farm location in Central Valley, California. Water wash was the technology that we were founded on as a company 30 years ago. I should say that Greenlane, while the underlying company's been around for about 30 years, we have been a public company on the Toronto Stock Exchange, on the Venture Exchange, for just over 18 months. And that was done by way of CPC transaction. Water wash was the founding technology 30 years ago. Greenlane was the first to commercialize that for biogas upgrading purposes. Water wash is particularly good as the projects get bigger and bigger in size. It scales well with size, it has high biomethane recovery, and it's robust, reliable operation. Pressure swing absorption, we added to the portfolio next. PSA is good for complex feedstocks. Landfills is a good example where you might use that. Membrane separation is another technology that we've added to our portfolio. It's good for smaller projects. It has reduced CapEx up front. Maybe that's a bit of a trade-off with an increased OpEx. They all do different things. Our job is to work with clients and ensure the right technology selection. That's important because more and more we're seeing, especially with the oil and gas players moving into the space, serial developers. So these are companies that want to develop a portfolio of projects. Not all projects will be the same. So if they're going to have a strategic partner on the biogas upgrading side, they'll want someone that can put in the right technology to make the best outcome for their given project. Again, just a quick view as to where we would slot these things in. So a little bit about Greenlane ourselves. 110 systems delivered globally into 18 countries. 11 of those countries were the first to provide a biogas upgrader into. So this market's been forming and coming together over the last couple of decades, and we think it's just hit the inflection point. We also have delivered the largest projects. Currently the largest RNG producing project in the world. It's in Montreal. Just prior to that, we had commissioned what at the time was the largest in northern Germany. So we have the largest project in Europe and the largest in the world. It's in Montreal. So I talked about large projects and how water wash works particularly well in those. Here's a couple examples, the Montreal and the northern Germany and Güstrow. Two very large projects. Those are multiple units running in parallel with our water wash technology. But we also are well known in the marketplace for doing the very difficult jobs. So the Swedish example here, this is where you take the resulting renewable natural gas, you liquefy it and put it into trucks for vehicle fuel. That causes some technical requirements that are unique. So we did that. And then this Paris, California project California at the time of doing this project, which was a few years ago, it had the most stringent of the pipeline injection requirements. And at the time, we were the first to deliver equipment that met this stringent requirement. And that was helpful for putting in place that 5 and 20% by 2030 requirement in the state of California. In terms of Greenlane, the way we're structured as a business is we have put this technology portfolio together, and we use a fully outsourced asset-light business model. This is deliberate. It's for scalability because we know we need to position for growth, rapid growth, hyper growth, and that we can get through our asset-light model. We retain all the IP and competency within the business, so all the design specifications of every component of how the system goes together, because that's really what's important when it comes to these is the integrity at the system level, as well as the design at the modular level. So that's process engineering, mechanical, electrical, controls, system integrity. All these things are within the business. We have our patented device titles. We also have a field operations team that is 24/7 available to either go to site, commission plants, hand them over, as well as do ongoing service and support. A quick view as to the competitive landscape. Over time, Greenlane has provided the most installed capacity. We have a few other competitors. Some names you might recognize, Air Liquide, of course, a very big company. They do have a biogas upgrading division that we compete with, and a few other names. I talked about expansion of the business. So our core is to provide the biogas upgrading equipment, but we have been talking about expanding into build, own, operate. And what does that look like? We did our first deal last summer with Swen Capital Partners based in Paris, France. And they had put together a unique fund, a green infrastructure fund to invest in renewable gas projects in Europe, 175 million euros. That's the fund in which we formed this joint venture. And what it allows us to do on the sales side for Greenlane is we can now offer our customers the traditional model of please buy our equipment, or secondly, upgrading as a service. And we do that through the joint venture. The joint venture holds that asset, sign up a customer for a long-term contract, monthly fee structure, and then we own and operate and maintain the equipment. So that's our first foray into that. We have a number of discussions with counterparties in other jurisdictions to do something either similar to this or also support developers in the development phase. Development capital is a scarce commodity in the industry today, and that's something that we're working on to provide that solution to our customers, which creates more certainty and obviously in the project itself, and it allows us to assist and get our equipment secured into the project much earlier and earlier towards a contract. On the financials, just a quick look at the cap structure. So 132 million shares outstanding, and we have a few warrants left to go. We did some warrants attached to our CPC transaction, which was in June of 2019. There's approximately 15 million of these 26-cent warrants remaining, and then about 1.9 million of the 70-cent warrants. Those expire here very shortly, and in a couple of weeks. In fact, it's not quite 1.9 anymore. There's a few options, of course, and then the total market capitalization approximately 350 million. We have a 5.2 million promissory note that's due in June. That carries a 7% accrued interest payment. Insider ownership, approximately 16%. Much of that is board members, including myself. A quick look at the financials. So I mentioned already the sales pipeline, just under 700 million. That's grown nicely since the beginning of 2019 of around 450 million. That's been a real focus for us to get to increase the size of that pipeline. But what really matters is translating that to the sales backlog. And we've seen phenomenal growth in our backlog. The last time we reported it, we report at the end of every quarter, just under 44 million, which was a 350% growth year over year. That growth in the backlog has translated into the revenue growth. For us, when we get a contract, the minute we sign it, it'll go into the backlog, And then we would see that translate into the revenue line on a percent completion basis of delivering that project over approximately 9 to 18 months. So we've seen in 2020, a quarterly growth of 50% increase quarter over quarter in that period of time. Our gross margins are between 25 and 30%. Cash on hand as at September 30th was roughly $5.5 million. But through exercise of warrants, that grew to $16.5 million by the end of December. And then just in January, we secured $26.5 million in gross proceeds from a bought deal financing that closed on January 27th. Quick look at management. Myself, my background, I've been with Greenlane just over 3 years. Before that, I had a 25-year career in the natural gas commercial vehicle space, hence my familiarity with RNG and all that can be done in the transportation space. Linda Freeman, our CFO, she joined us after a number of years in the space. Most recently, she was 5 years as CFO of TSX-listed Altera Power before they got purchased. Brent Jacklin, long-timer in the biogas space, well-respected in the industry. He's our Senior Vice President of Sales and Service. So I'll finish with some key highlights. Again, remember, we're a pure play. We focus solely on the RNG space. We've provided the largest global supply capacity with more than 110 systems in 18 countries, demonstrated technology leadership across multiple biogas upgrading technologies, which is more ways to help our customers and more ways to win orders. Current backlog as September 30th is $43 million, which is a 350% growth year over year. Healthy margin-based business, fast approaching profitability. We'll be profitable at about 30 million top line. We expect to exceed that in 2021. And recent strategic partnerships enabling expansion into the recurring revenue and profits model with SWN through Build on Operate, and the market opportunity over $90 billion in biogas upgrading equipment sales. Thank you.